Megan Carter sat in the dimly lit briefing room, her fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the table. The holographic display flickered with images of the Zkarn Dominion, a race known throughout the galaxy for their unmatched strength and brutal traditions. In battle, their empire was vast, stretching across star systems and planets ruled by a monarchy that believed only in the power of war and conquest. They had decimated entire species in their quest for dominance. And now the human race stood at the precipice of a new war. Humanity had become a target for the Zkarn, but there was a chance, a fragile one, to avoid total destruction. The Zkarn had extended an invitation, a request for diplomacy. They were willing to negotiate an alliance, but there was a catch, something that set the Zkarn apart from all other galactic species. They would only accept a human diplomat who could defeat one of their own in battle. No other terms, no other conditions. The Zkarn believed that only those who could face them in the arena could understand the true nature of strength and honor. It was their law, and it was absolute. Megan had never considered herself a warrior. She had spent her life mastering the art of negotiation, understanding politics and human psychology, but never combated was a skill she had never needed in her years. As a diplomat, her role was always to speak, not to fight. Her body was not built for battle. Her mind was her weapon, her words her shield. But now she was being asked to become something she was not, and something she feared. It was not simply an abstract concept. It was real, it was deadly, and it was coming for her. She had been briefed on the details. The Zkarn were a terrifying species, massive in size and strength. Their warriors lived and breathed combat, every fiber of their being dedicated to battle. They revered the bloody traditions of their people and demanded that anyone who sought their favor prove themselves worthy through violence. No other race had ever succeeded in meeting their challenge, but humanity had no choice. This was their last chance at peace. As Megan stood up from her seat, she couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. Her assignment was simple. She was to go to Zkarn Prime, the capital planet, and negotiate an alliance. She was one of the brightest diplomats humanity had, but that meant nothing in the face of this challenge. She knew that the odds were stacked against her, and her first instinct was to decline, to pass the mission on to someone more qualified, someone more prepared. But she couldn't do that. The stakes were too high. The fate of billions rested on this mission. Humanity had no other option but to send someone, and she was the one chosen. There was no turning back. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. She had to face this with the same resolve that had carried her through every diplomatic crisis, every tense negotiation with hostile worlds. Her commanding officer, General West, spoke to her, his voice steady and firm. "You've got this, Megan," he said. "We've seen your skills in the field of diplomacy. Now it's time to see if you can apply them in a way no one ever expected. You have the mind to outsmart them. Your victory doesn't have to come through brute force. It's all about understanding the rules of their game. You'll have to play by their customs, but you'll find a way to turn the tables." Megan nodded slowly, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the thought of fighting a battle she knew she couldn't win, or the prospect of failing humanity entirely. Both were real and both were looming on the horizon. But for now she had to focus. She had to prepare for what was coming. It was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a fight for the survival of her species, and she had to find a way to win it, or lose everything. The transport ship that carried Megan towards Zkarn Prime was silent except for the soft hum of the engines as they glided through the vastness of space. She sat alone in her quarters, staring out the small viewport at the stars, knowing that her destination was a place where strength was worshipped and weakness was punished. She could feel the weight of the challenge growing heavier with every passing second. As the ship neared its destination, her thoughts became a whirlwind, filled with fear and uncertainty. She had never been one to shy away from difficult situations, but this was different. She wasn't just stepping into the unknown. She was stepping into the heart of a warrior's world, where she would be judged not for her intellect or her ability to speak, but for her capacity to survive. When they landed on Zkarn Prime, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air itself seemed charged with energy. As she disembarked the ship, her boots hitting the ground with a sound that echoed in the cavernous hall that welcomed her, she was met by a group of Zkarn officials, their expressions cold and unreadable, towering over her. With their hulking frames and armored bodies, their eyes locked onto her every move. They didn't speak at first, only observed her. With an intensity that made her feel as though she were being dissected piece by piece, Megan stood tall despite the unease that threatened to overtake her. She had to remind herself that she was here on a mission of peace, not war. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't afford to let them see her fear. She couldn't show weakness, not in front of these creatures. The leader of the delegation, a Karn warlord named Torek, spoke in a deep guttural voice that reverberated through the hall. "You are here because you have chosen to face our challenge," he said. His words were both a statement and a warning. "You will fight our greatest champion in combat, and if you survive, only then will the negotiations begin." He glanced at the other warriors around him, and they all nodded in agreement. Megan had been prepared for the formality of the challenge, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel all the more real. She felt a surge of dread wash over her, but she fought it back with a firm nod. "I understand," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Torek's eyes narrowed as if testing her resolve. "Good," he grunted. "You will meet Vroth, the undefeated champion of the Dominion. He is a living legend. No one has ever bested him. And you will be his next opponent. It will be a battle to the death," he continued in a voice that dripped with finality. "There would be no second chances, no mercy, and no room for error." Megan swallowed hard, but kept her composure. It seemed impossible to defeat such a warrior, but she had no choice. She had to try. She had no weapons, no experience in combat, no knowledge of this Karn fighting styles, but she had her mind, her ability to adapt, and her willingness to survive. She wouldn't go down without a fight. This Karn delegation led her to an arena. The ground beneath her feet was made of hard stone. The air was thick with the heat of an unrelenting sun, and the sound of the crowd growing louder. As they gathered to witness the spectacle, Megan could hear their voices rising in anticipation, and for the first time she realized just how serious the stakes were. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. But there was no turning back now. She stepped into the arena, her mind racing as she faced the towering figure of Vroth, who stood across from her, with a smug grin on his face. This was no ordinary warrior. He was the epitome of Karn's strength and pride, and he was about to destroy her, unless she could find a way to outwit him. The moment Megan laid eyes on Vroth, she knew she was in over her head. His presence was overwhelming, towering above her, his muscles rippling beneath his dark skin, and his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a seasoned warrior. His weapon was a massive hammer, one that looked as though it could crush her with a single strike. She tried to steady her breathing, but the anxiety gnawed at her insides. The crowd was roaring around her, their chants echoing through the arena, calling for blood, calling for a spectacle, and Megan could feel the pressure mounting with every passing second. She had no idea how to fight a creature like this. No training, no experience, just the knowledge that if she didn't survive this battle, humanity would lose its last chance at peace. Vroth's grin widened as he raised his hammer. With ease, the sound of metal scraping against stone filled the air. As he prepared to strike, Megan could hear her heart pounding in her chest, her body frozen with a mix of fear and adrenaline. She wasn't built for combat. She wasn't built to be a warrior. She was a diplomat, a speaker. But in that moment, her words meant nothing. They were useless here in this arena where only strength mattered. Vroth swung his hammer with terrifying speed. Megan barely dodged the blow as it crashed into the stone floor, sending debris flying in every direction. She scrambled back on instinct, her heart racing. As she took in her surroundings, the arena was vast, but the ground was uneven with jagged rocks scattered throughout and towering pillars that could offer her some cover if she could just get to them in time. She couldn't fight him head-on. She had to think smarter. She had to outmaneuver him. As Vroth prepared for another swing, Megan ducked behind one of the pillars, her mind racing. She couldn't defeat him in a physical fight, that was clear, but maybe she didn't need to. She remembered the stories she had read about Karn warriors. They were known for their pride and arrogance. They believed in the supremacy of strength, but that didn't mean they were invincible. They had weaknesses, just like anyone else, and Megan had to find a way to exploit them. Vroth roared in frustration as he swung his hammer again. But this time Megan was ready. She darted from behind the pillar and rolled to the side just as the hammer crashed into the stone. Where she had been moments before, dust and rubble filled the air, and for a brief moment Vroth's sight was obscured. Megan seized the opportunity to dart forward. She had no weapon to match his brute force, but she did have her agility, and her mind. She aimed for his unprotected side where his armor was weakest. She struck with everything she had, landing a blow with her fist to his exposed ribs. The force wasn't enough to knock him down, but it made him stagger back in surprise. Vroth glared at her, his eyes burning with rage and disbelief. How dare she strike him? How dare this insignificant human challenge his superiority? He roared and charged again, but this time his movements were more frantic, less calculated. Megan used his fury against him, ducking under his next swing and darting to the side, forcing him to overextend and lose his balance for a moment. Megan could feel the sweat on her brow as she continued to evade his attacks. She wasn't winning the fight, but she wasn't losing either. Every time she dodged or blocked a strike, it drained him just a little more. Every time he missed, it chipped away at his confidence, his arrogance. She had no intention of beating him in strength, but she could outlast him. She could force him to make a mistake. The crowd had quieted as they watched the unthinkable unfold, a human dodging and weaving around this Karn champion. They didn't know how to react. They had never seen anything like this before. A human wasn't supposed to survive this long. But Megan wasn't just surviving. She was playing a game of endurance and patience, and with every passing second, she could feel herself getting closer to her goal. She could feel the edge of victory just beyond her reach if she could just keep him off balance for a little longer. Megan could hear Vroth's breath grow heavier with every swing of his hammer. His fury was becoming his downfall as he swung wildly, missing her by mere inches each time. His confidence was eroding faster than he realized, and Megan knew she couldn't let up. Not now, not when she was so close. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, not when his rage was blinding him to everything else. His pride was his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. She had to exploit it. Vroth growled in frustration, swinging his hammer in an arc that sent shockwaves through the ground. Megan quickly dashed to the side, her feet barely touching the stone floor, before she launched herself into a roll behind another pillar. This time Vroth followed her movement, his steps heavy and thunderous. The sound of his boots pounding against the stone made it clear he was closing in. She couldn't let him catch up. She needed to move, and fast. With a burst of adrenaline, Megan shot out from behind the pillar, just as Vroth's hammer slammed into the rock with a deafening crack. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the arena, sending dust and debris flying. She barely avoided being caught in the blast, but as she stumbled back to her feet, she realized something. This Karn champion wasn't invincible. His movements had become more predictable. He was slowing down just enough for her to read his intentions. In that moment, Megan realized what she had to do. She had to stop running and start taking control. She couldn't beat Vroth at his own game, but she could turn the tables. She had to make him come to her. Vroth's next swing was a vicious one, aimed directly at her head. But this time, Megan didn't dodge. She stepped into it, her hands moving faster than she'd ever thought possible. She grabbed the end of his hammer just as it came crashing down, twisting it with all her might. Vroth let out a snarl of surprise as he tried to pull the weapon back, but Megan's grip was strong, and her positioning was perfect. She had forced him into a trap of his own making. With a final twist of her wrists, she disarmed him, sending the hammer skidding across the arena floor. Vroth's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at her, his once smug grin replaced by a scowl of frustration. He was now weaponless, and for the first time since the battle began, Megan felt a glimmer of hope. She had done the impossible. She had taken away his greatest advantage, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not yet. Vroth stepped back, his body tense, his fists now raised in front of him, his eyes narrowed in focused rage. Megan knew the next part of this fight would be even more dangerous. He was faster now, more desperate, and his attacks would be even harder to dodge. But she had seen the cracks in his armor, she had seen his overconfidence, and she knew how to exploit it. She took a deep breath and faced him directly, not backing down, not showing fear. She waited for him to make the first move. She had to make him think she was vulnerable so that he would charge at her full force, and when he did, she would be ready. Vroth lunged forward with a roar, his massive fists swinging in a brutal arc, aimed to crush her. Megan sidestepped at the last possible moment, using the momentum of his charge to push him off balance. For a split second he was vulnerable, and that was all she needed. She struck with precision, her fist connecting with the side of his head in a quick, sharp motion, a strike that landed harder than she expected. Vroth staggered, his knees buckling slightly as the impact reverberated through his body. For a moment he wavered in place, and Megan took the opportunity to press forward, delivering another well-placed blow to his midsection. This time he couldn't recover as quickly, and as he gasped for breath, Megan saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed the unthinkable, a human holding her ground against a Karn champion. It was something they had never seen before, something they couldn't understand. How could she possibly defeat him? How could she survive this long without even a weapon? But Megan wasn't thinking about the crowd or the odds. She was focused on one thing, and one thing only: survival. She knew that if she could keep him off balance just a little longer, if she could keep him questioning his own strength, she might actually pull this off. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to stay alive long enough for the Karn to realize that victory could come from more than just strength. The silence in the arena was deafening. The crowd's reaction had frozen in time. No one had moved, no one had made a sound. They simply stared in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. Vroth, the mighty champion of the Karn, lying defeated on the ground by a human woman. Megan's chest rose and fell with each breath, her heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. But there was no time to relax, no time to savor the victory. She had won. The real challenge had just begun. Vroth was still on the ground, his body heaving with exertion, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of astonishment and frustration. He had been bested, and in the eyes of the Karn that was an unforgivable humiliation. But Megan had no interest in dwelling on his defeat. Her mind was already moving ahead. She had to ensure that the Karn accepted her victory and agreed to the peace talks. If she didn't, they could easily turn the entire situation into a massacre. The Karn warlord struggled to push himself up, but he had no strength left. His movements were sluggish and weak. The once proud champion, now a shadow of his former self. Megan stood over him and extended a hand, not to harm him, but to offer him the respect that he had never offered her. She knew that this gesture was her only chance to ensure the Karn did not see her victory as a further insult. Vroth looked at her hand, and for a long moment seemed to hesitate, the pride in his eyes warring with the reality of his situation. But finally, with a grunt, he reached out and took her hand. She pulled him up with surprising strength, and as he stood before her, he met her gaze, his defiance still burning, but now tempered with the recognition that she had earned his respect. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. They had never seen his Karn warrior accept the defeat of a challenger in this way, much less one who was so humiliated. It was unheard of. Megan could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the weight of the galaxy watching in that moment. She realized that this wasn't just a battle for her life. This was a battle for the future of her people. The Karn had never seen a human stand before them as an equal before now, and she had changed their perception forever. Vroth raised his hand, and the murmurs quieted as he addressed the crowd, his voice low but strong in the silence of the arena. He spoke words that Megan never expected to hear from the mouth of his Karn champion. In a voice that resonated with reluctant admiration, he announced the human diplomat had earned his respect, and thus had proven herself worthy of the alliance. He had no choice but to honor the challenge and accept the terms of peace. The Karn had made their laws clear, but they were warriors above all else, and the greatest warriors knew when to acknowledge defeat. The arena erupted into an uncertain but resounding roar. It was not the cheering they would give for a victor who had slain an enemy. It was a mixture of shock and reluctant approval. The Karn had been forced to confront something they had never considered before: the power of intellect and the strength of character. And as they watched Vroth bow his head in acknowledgement, they knew that the game had changed forever. Megan allowed herself a small breath of relief, but she knew better than to relax completely. The battle was over, but the war was still ahead. She had earned the right to negotiate, but the real test would come once the talks began. The Zukarn were known for their cunning and ruthlessness in diplomacy just as much as in battle, and if they saw even the slightest weakness in her, they would exploit it. But for now, she had won her survival, and with it the chance to save humanity from annihilation. Vroth stepped back, and with a final look at Megan, he turned to the rest of his people, his voice booming across the arena. "We will honor the terms of the challenge. The human diplomat has earned the right to speak, and thus we shall listen to her words. This day marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Zukarn Dominion, a chapter that no one had ever expected to be written." Megan stood in the center of the arena as the crowd continued to murmur around her, their voices rising and falling in disbelief and awe. The weight of the moment was beginning to sink in, but there was no time to savor the victory, no time to dwell on the shock of having bested one of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. She could feel the eyes of every Zukarn upon her, watching, waiting to see what she would do next. She had just won their respect in the arena, but the real battle was about to begin. The negotiations were where the true test lay, and she had to be ready to face the Zukarn on their own terms. Vroth's announcement had sent ripples through the crowd, and Megan could see the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The warriors around her no longer looked at her with contempt or disdain, but with a wary respect. It was the first step in her mission, but it was only the beginning. She knew that the real struggle would come in the diplomatic chambers, where she would face the full power of the Zukarn monarchy, their cunning, their strength, their merciless desire for dominance. But for now she had won a temporary peace, and that was a victory she could not afford to squander. As she was escorted away from the arena by a small group of Zukarn guards, Megan kept her head high, though her mind was racing. She had taken down the champion of the Dominion, but she had also seen the deeper currents at play. There was more to this race than brute force and raw strength. The Zukarn were a people defined by honor and pride, but they were also a people who respected strength in all its forms. And while Megan had proven herself in combat, it would be her mind that would truly determine her success or failure in the negotiations ahead. The corridors of the Zukarn palace were dimly lit but vast, and imposing. Their high ceilings and dark stone walls created an atmosphere of both grandeur and intimidation. As they walked deeper into the heart of the palace, Megan could feel the coldness of their civilization, the harsh beauty of a people who had built an empire through war and conquest. She had never felt more out of place in her life, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't let it show. The guards finally led her into a large chamber where the Zukarn monarchs awaited her, their towering forms seated upon thrones carved from dark stone, their eyes glowing with the faint light of bioluminescence. The Zukarn royalty were even more imposing than the warriors Megan had faced in the arena. Their presence filled the room with an oppressive weight, and for a moment Megan felt as if she were a mere speck in the vastness of their power. The Zukarn king, a massive figure named Khazar, regarded her silently, his eyes narrowing, as if sizing her up, as though trying to determine if she was worthy of his attention. He spoke in a voice that was both commanding and heavy with authority. "You have defeated our champion," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "The pride of our people has been tested, and we find it lacking. You are the first human to ever best one of our greatest warriors, and for that you have earned the right to speak. But understand this, Megan Carter, you will face the full force of the Dominion in these chambers. Our laws are absolute, and we do not bend to weakness. You have won your place, but do not mistake it for an easy victory." Megan met his gaze head-on, refusing to let the weight of his words break her resolve. She had come this far, and she would not falter now. She nodded and spoke with calm determination. "Your laws are known to me, Khazar, and I respect them. I respect the strength of your people, but I am here for more than just survival. I am here to forge a future where humanity and the Zukarn can coexist. I did not fight to simply win a battle. I fought to win a peace, and that is what we will discuss today." There was a moment of silence as the monarchs exchanged glances. Megan could feel the tension in the room building, but she refused to be intimidated. She had the upper hand now, and she knew it. As long as she held her ground, as long as she remained steadfast in her mission, the Zukarn would have no choice But to listen, the real fight had begun, but this time she was armed with something even more powerful than strength. It was the power of diplomacy and the will to protect her people. Khazar leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, as if intrigued by her words. "Your words are bold, human," he said slowly, "but your actions have earned you the right to speak. We shall hear your terms. But be warned, we do not offer alliances lightly, and we do not tolerate failure." Megan's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand the stakes. I am not here to fail. I am here to offer a future where we both survive, where we both thrive." The monarchs exchanged another glance, and Megan knew that the real game had begun. The battlefield had shifted from the arena to the negotiating table, but she was ready. Megan stood tall as the tension in the room thickened. The Zikaran monarchs regarded her with silent curiosity, but their gaze was not one of approval. It was one of assessment. They were weighing her words carefully, testing her resolve. "Khazar," the king spoke first, his voice low and calculating. "Your confidence is admirable, human, but confidence alone will not win this war. Your species is still young and fragile. You may have bested Vroth, but that does not mean you can negotiate with us on equal terms." Megan's heart beat steadily as she locked eyes with him. She had anticipated this. She knew that the Zikaran would never see her as an equal, not after a single battle, not after a single victory. She had to show them that she understood their power, and that she was willing to match it with intellect, diplomacy, and a vision for the future. She took a deep breath and responded, "Your strength is undeniable, Khazar, but humanity has its own strengths. We are resourceful, adaptable, and most importantly, we are united by the desire to survive. We do not seek war, we seek peace and cooperation. And that is what I offer today, a future where both our peoples can thrive in a galaxy that is constantly changing." The monarchs exchanged glances again, their expressions unreadable, but Megan could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on her. They were not easily swayed, they did not give their trust lightly, but she had the seed of an idea. She could sense that this moment was a crossroads, one that could determine the future of both humanity and the Zikaran dominion. The room was silent save for the soft echo of her own heartbeat. Khazar shifted in his throne, his massive form looming over her, his eyes studying her carefully. He spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. "I am intrigued by your words, Megan Carter, but words are not enough in our world. Actions speak louder than promises. You claim that humanity desires peace, but how can we trust you? How can we believe that your species will not turn against us? The moment you grow stronger, how do we know you will not betray us when the opportunity arises?" Megan felt the weight of his question land like a blow. She knew the Zikaran would never take a chance on someone who couldn't prove themselves. She knew that they would need more than just her promises. They would need something tangible, something that would guarantee their safety and security in this alliance. She couldn't offer them empty words. She had to offer something real, something they could hold on to. She paused for a moment, considering her next move carefully. She had one chance to show them her commitment to peace and to the survival of both their peoples. "I offer a binding pact, a treaty that not only secures peace, but also guarantees cooperation in defense technology and resource management. Humanity has access to vast, untapped resources in our system, resources that could benefit both our peoples. And I offer the first of these resources to you now in exchange for an agreement that we will stand together against any force that threatens our survival." The monarchs were still and silent. Khazar's gaze was unflinching, but Megan could sense that he was listening carefully. Her offer had given them something to consider, a tangible benefit, a show of humanity's willingness to cooperate rather than conquer, but there was still skepticism in the air, and she knew that words would not be enough to seal the deal. Khazar finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but filled with weight. "We have seen what your species can do in battle. We have seen your strength in the arena. But we also know that your people have much to learn. Your offer is intriguing, but it is not enough. We need to know that you can keep your word. We need proof that your species will not crumble when faced with greater challenges, that we can rely on you when the time comes to defend the galaxy." Megan nodded, understanding the depth of his challenge. She knew that her offer alone wouldn't be enough to win the Zikaran over. They needed to see humanity in action. They needed to see her people step up and prove their worth. She would have to push humanity to its limits to show the Zikaran that they could be trusted, that they would keep their promises. "I understand," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You will have your proof. Humanity will rise to the challenge and stand beside you in the face of any threat. I will ensure that we are ready to keep our word and uphold this pact, but you must trust me and trust in the strength of cooperation between our peoples." Khazar leaned back in his throne, his eyes never leaving hers. He studied her carefully, and for a long moment the room was filled with tension as the monarchs waited for his decision. Finally he spoke, his voice commanding and filled with finality. "Your words are bold, human, and your actions have earned you a place at this table. We will give you the chance to prove yourself. We will take your offer to our council. But know this: if your people fail us, if you betray this agreement, there will be no second chances." Megan nodded firmly. "I understand, and I promise you, Khazar, humanity will not fail you." The monarchs rose from their thrones in unison, and the chamber seemed to vibrate with the power of their presence. The deal had not been struck yet, but Megan had made the first step towards securing it. The future was uncertain, but she had earned the chance to fight for it. Megan left the chamber with a sense of cautious optimism. The monarchs had not agreed to her terms yet, but they had given her a chance to prove humanity's worth, and that was a victory in itself. The hallways of the palace were silent as she was escorted to her quarters by a pair of Zikaran guards, their eyes never leaving her, their presence heavy and intimidating. But she had learned long ago to block out such distractions. She had to focus on the task ahead. The peace talks were far from over, and the hardest part was still to come. As she entered her quarters, she found the room simple but functional. The stone walls were adorned with nothing but a few basic fixtures and a single low table in the center. But the view from the large window was breathtaking. The alien landscape outside stretched for miles, an endless horizon of jagged mountains and vast plains that seemed to go on forever. It was beautiful in a way that felt both alien and familiar, as if it were a reflection of her own journey. Megan sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind racing, as she replayed the events of the day over and over. The encounter with Throth had been brutal, but it had been the moment that had changed everything. Winning his respect had set the stage for the diplomatic talks, but it was the conversation with Khazar that had truly defined the course of her mission. She had been given a chance to prove humanity's strength, but now it was time to show them that they could be trusted. She knew that the Zikaran would not settle for empty promises. They wanted to see humanity's resolve in action. They wanted to know that when the time came, they could count on her people to stand with them against any threat. Megan had made an offer, but now she had to find a way to deliver on that promise. She had to push humanity to its limits to show the Zikaran that they were capable of more than just survival. They had to demonstrate their strength, unity, and their commitment to peace. As she sat there, her mind turned to the next steps. The war with the Zikaran was not over, but it was no longer about defeating them in battle. It was about winning their trust, proving that humanity could be a valuable ally and not just another potential enemy. She needed to get her people ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had to ensure that they were prepared to prove themselves on the galactic stage, to show that they could rise to the occasion when this Zikaran Council called for action. Megan stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the alien landscape. The stars twinkling in the distance reminded her of home of Earth and the countless generations of people who had fought to ensure humanity's survival. She thought of her family, her friends, the people she had left behind, and the future she was fighting to secure for them. She couldn't fail them. She couldn't fail humanity. Or the Zikaran. The door to her quarters opened, and a Zikaran officer stepped inside. He was tall and imposing, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, his voice deep and measured. "You are summoned, Megan Carter. The Zikaran Council has convened to discuss your offer. They have agreed to consider it, but they require more information about the resources you promised and the steps you intend to take to ensure that your people can keep their word." Megan turned to face him, her resolve hardening. She knew what this meant. The council was serious about the aliens, but they still had doubts. They wanted to see the specifics. They wanted to know that humanity was ready for the responsibility. She had no choice But to deliver, she had to show them that humanity could be counted on, that they were ready to take on whatever challenges came their way. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I will present the necessary information, and I will ensure that humanity is ready to fulfill the terms of the agreement," the officer noted, and motioned for her to follow him as they walked through the palace hallways. Megan felt the weight of her task pressing down on her. The Zukarn were not an easy people to win over. They respected strength, but they also respected those who could deliver on their promises. And now it was time for humanity to prove that they could be trusted as true allies. They reached a large chamber where the council was already gathered. The monarchs sat at a long stone table, their faces unreadable. As they watched her enter, Megan stood tall and confident, but inside her mind was racing. She had to make them see the value of her offer. She had to show them that humanity could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Zukarn, not as equals, but as partners in a future that neither could afford to face alone. Khazar's voice rang out as she entered the chamber. "You have come, Megan Carter," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "Your offer has intrigued us, but now we must see what you can bring to the table. We have seen your strength in battle. Now we wish to see if your people have the strength to back your words." Megan nodded and stepped forward, ready to face the final challenge of her mission. Megan stood before the Zukarn Council, her mind racing as she prepared to present humanity's case. This was the moment. Everything she had fought for hinged on the next few minutes. Every word, every gesture had to count. She couldn't afford to falter now. Khazar's gaze was unrelenting as he watched her, his massive form looming over the table, his eyes glowing with a sense of judgment. She had faced him once in the arena, but this was a different kind of battle, and she knew she would need more than just strength to win. She stepped forward and laid out her plan, the details of humanity's resources, the technologies they had developed, the strategies they could offer the Zukarn in the event of a galactic conflict. It wasn't enough to simply talk about peace. She had to show them the potential for prosperity, a future where both peoples could thrive together in a universe filled with uncertainty and danger. She outlined every possible scenario, every risk, and every advantage that came with cooperation. The Zukarn were not a people who trusted easily, but Megan had learned that they respected thoroughness and precision, so she gave them both. Her voice was steady as she spoke, describing the vast untapped resources in the human-controlled sectors, the mining operations and agricultural advancements that could aid the Zukarn in their own struggles with dwindling supplies. She spoke of the medical advancements humanity had made and how those could be used to aid both species in times of crisis. She spoke of trade routes and shared technology that could benefit both sides, and she did not shy away from the realities of the risks that came with such an alliance. Throughout her speech, the council remained silent, their faces unreadable, but Megan could feel their attention on her every word. She knew that her offer was solid. She knew that humanity had something of value to bring to the table, but it wasn't just the resources or technology that mattered now. It was her ability to convince them that humanity was worth trusting, that they would not betray the Zukarn as so many other species had done before. When she finished, there was a long silence. The Zukarn seemed to be weighing her words carefully before Khazar spoke again, his voice deep and commanding. "Your offer is impressive, human, but the Zukarn do not make alliances based on promises alone. We must see proof of your people's resolve. We must know that when the time comes, you will not hesitate to fight at our side." Megan nodded, understanding the weight of his challenge. She had already given them everything she could in terms of resources and cooperation, but now the real test began. Her people had to prove that they were ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Zukarn in the face of any threat. She knew that if humanity couldn't prove their worth in this way, the treaty would be meaningless. "I understand, Khazar," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Humanity will stand with you when the time comes. We will face whatever threat arises together, and we will not hesitate. We will fight alongside you to secure our mutual future. I will ensure that we are prepared to keep our word." The monarchs exchanged glances once more, and for a moment, Megan felt a sense of doubt creeping in. Would they believe her words? Would they trust humanity enough to move forward with the alliance? But then Khazar's eyes softened just slightly as he looked at her. "You have earned our respect, Megan Carter, but respect alone will not win this war. You will have to show us that humanity can stand united in the face of what is to come." Megan took a deep breath. She had known this would be the case from the beginning. They had respected her for her victory. But now she had to earn their trust in a way that words alone couldn't accomplish. Humanity had to prove its strength and resolve to the Zikaran, and that would take time, effort, and sacrifice. "We will prove ourselves, Khazar," she said without hesitation. "You will see that humanity can keep its word, and stand by your side when the galaxy needs us most." The room fell into another tense silence as the council considered her words, and for a moment, Megan wondered if the whole negotiation would collapse right here. But then Khazar finally spoke, his voice steady and final. "The council will accept your terms, Megan Carter, but we will hold you to your word, and we will judge your people by your actions. We will not make this alliance lightly. But if humanity does what it promises, the Zikaran will stand with you." Megan's heart surged with relief and determination. She had done it. She had secured the first step toward an alliance. But the real work was just beginning. This was only the beginning of a much larger journey, a journey where humanity would prove its place among the stars and show the galaxy that even the smallest among them could rise to greatness when they stood united. The council dismissed her, and as she left the chamber, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. But there was also a flicker of hope. Humanity had earned its place at the table, and now it was up to her and her people to prove they were worthy of the future they had just begun to build.